course, the second I'm about to go on, my dog decides to come in and visit and make some noise behind me. So hard choices, dog. You have to go out right now. Go on, go on, go on. Sorry for that. I was debating whether to keep the door open or not, and obviously, well, it was good to have a little visit, I guess. But good to be with you this morning. And the opening kind of song here, I'm going to sing for you a little bit, is a song from Mr. Rogers. It's called "Sometimes People Are Good." Sometimes people are good, and they do just what they should. But the very same people who are good sometimes are the very same people who are bad sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? And sometimes people get wet, and their parents get upset. But the very same people who get wet sometimes are the very same people who are dry sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? And sometimes people make noise and they break each other's toys. But the very same people who are noisy sometimes are the very same people who are quiet sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? Isn't it the same for you? So our opening words to top off Mr. Rogers is from J.R.R. Tolkien. Some believe it is only great power, and these words are, I love these words, they hold me. And I think I actually did a J.R.R. Tolkien quote last month too, but so you know where my inspiration lies. But but he says some people believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check. But that is not what I have found. It is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. In front of the Reichstag building in Berlin, the Reichstag in Berlin there's a memorial that sits there. 96 cast iron plates in various shapes and sizes are laid out next to one another, and almost like a series of gravestones. Each plate has inscribed on it a name, a location, a date of birth, and a date of death. On it are names like Julius Adler, Helene Fleischer, Arthur Nagel, and Paul Voigt. 96 names in total, with room to grow as they recover history and learn more of who fits on that, should be on that memorial. Each of those 96 people was a member of the German parliament and died at the hands of the Nazis between 1933 and 1945. Each name was a person who stood up and challenged the rise of Hitler through their role in parliament, and voted to oppose his rise to power, and paid the ultimate price for it with their lives. And I only can imagine that in many ways must have been a hard decision. Very few of us are ever put in the position of having to risk our lives for a choice. And I'm grateful for that, to sacrifice in a way that these 96 people had to. But I think for many of us, our personal integrity, our moral sense of what is right and wrong is challenged quite often with difficult choices. It could be a moment at work when the company, a manager, or a fellow employee is making an unethical decision. It could be a moment when we witness an act of racism or sexual harassment or homophobia or transphobia or ableism or etc. On and on when we experience that. It could be a parenting decision when our passions and our exhaustion have a strong grip on us. It could be how we invest our money. And certainly it shows up in how we spend our money. In those moments of hard choices, do we speak up? Do we step forward? Do we take that risk? Do we act in keeping with our values? Some years ago, I was in a store, one of the few remaining video stores, but I promise the story isn't that dated. It was a cold, wintry day, sleeting outside, icy, wet, and dark. Not unlike kind of like the weather right now. I think it was actually in December. And as I was wandering in the back of the store, I heard up front some yelling. The store manager was actually shouting at someone, "Get out of here. You can't stay here." And I heard a smaller voice saying, "I'm just trying to get out of the cold. It's cold. I'm just trying to get out of the cold." But the yelling continued, "Get out of here. You can't stay here." And I looked to the front, and as this was going on, and I saw a homeless man there that I knew. And I was immediately struggling with what to do in this moment. Do I confront the owner for his response to this man? Do I remain silent? If I speak up, what do I say? How do I say it? I just want to go home after a long day's work and watch a movie. I don't want this conflict. What do I do? So I walked to the front of the store and I said, "Is that Sam?" That was the name of the man, and I knew him. And I began a conversation with him, with Sam, while basically ignoring the store owner. And after talking with Sam a bit, I asked him if I could drive him to the library. And that's what we did. I put down the videos, the DVDs I was preparing to rent, told the owner what I was going to do, and Sam and I left for the library with the owner actually thanking me on the way out. Now, I've often wondered about that decision, if that was the right one. There's some things I think that were good about that decision, but there are other things I'm not so sure about. I basically went into conflict resolution mode and de-escalated a conflict, but I also never confronted the owner on his behavior. He was mean. And the next time this happened, there might not be someone there to resolve this issue. And I also wonder what I might have done if I didn't happen to know the person who was being yelled at, didn't know his name, didn't know he was safe to drive to the library. Would I have said something? Would I have risked the confrontation? As a generally conflict avoidant person, truthfully, I don't know. What maybe would you have done in that situation? It's a good kind of exercise to think it through, I think. As I mentioned, I am very moved by the Tolkien quote from our opening words. Some believe it is the only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. It is small, everyday deeds of ordinary folks that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love. Small acts of kindness and love. When I left my ministerial internship 20 years ago, one of the congregants gave me a gift. It was a clock with words from Robert Kennedy inscribed on it. These words said, "Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. And in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation." And I remember, full of youthful arrogance, that I took a little offense to that. What do you mean I'm not going to change history? but now I really appreciate it, because just as Tolkien and Kennedy said, it is in those small decisions, those small acts, that we make a difference. Recently, I had another hard choice to make. I was in a meeting, and again at work and related to homelessness, which was where a lot of my hard choices show up. I was in a meeting a bit over a month ago with representatives from the city and other social service providers. And in that meeting, a representative told us the Parks Board would be voting on a policy change to prohibit the use of tents during the daytime in the parks. They were going to ban tents. There was already a nighttime curfew in the parks, but now they wanted to extend that tent curfew, if you will, the ban, all day. And there were, and I knew there were people sleeping there already in the parks, despite saying the city that no one was. There was a big setup of tents in one of our local parks there. And I pushed back a little bit about dismantling the tents in winter in a pandemic. And the city argued that the tents were a health concern, and the meeting came to an end. And that was choice number one for me in that situation. I didn't state my objection to that as strongly and as clearly as I should have and could have in that moment. I made a decision to play it a little safe and a little easy there. Over the next several days, I debated whether to let this issue go or say something publicly. The city was counting on passing this new policy easily. It was presumed that it was just going to go through. And the reason they notified us in that meeting was not to get our opinion on the new policy or to, suggest it shouldn't be a policy, but to get us to warn people camping in the parks that they would have to leave soon. They were actually trying to get us to give people notice. It was also rather clear that public feedback on this was not something they wanted or were interested in. So I knew if I said something, I knew if I said something, it would create a big public uproar. If I went public with this and talked to people, I knew it would create a big public uproar, and it would be a fight. And it was a fight I really, really didn't want. And you might, of course, be wondering why I, as a homeless service provider, would have any struggles at all with going public about this, and that this is exactly the type of fight we're supposed to engage in. But what you might not know is we depend on funding and cooperation from the city, and we also depend on funding and cooperation from local businesses who don't like the buildup of people in the park. And to go against the city could put that collaboration at risk. And honestly, it did, and it has. Having lost so many of these battles before and surrender these little battles to the higher cause of so many times where I've just had to let these little, or chosen to let these little battles go, I just paused, leaning towards not saying anything about it and not making a fuss about it. And I also had just gone on vacation, so I really was looking forward to that as well. But someone else heard about the proposal, a county employee who's not allowed to speak publicly on such things, and they checked in with me about whether I had seen it. And we talked about it and how I was struggling with whether to talk about it, whether I needed and wanted to get in trouble again. because I didn't want the backlash. But this person's encouragement kind of really motivated me and pushed me over the edge to say something. I was on the fence throughout it, really trying to figure out what to do. And this person's encouragement really helped me understand that that was the right decision, was to say something. And I did, with a very, very gentle post on Facebook announcing the upcoming vote at the meeting and encouraging people to express their opinions about it, recognizing that, it's a public forum. People should know about what's being voted on and have a right to speak to it. Over 230 people showed up at that meeting. Every single person who spoke out in that meeting spoke against the tent ban, every single one. And many also spoke out against the overnight ban on sleeping in the parks, which was already in place, hoping that the city would not enforce that, especially now during the winter, especially in a pandemic. And it was beyond inspiring to see that kind of huge outreach of people in our community come forward in this way. And I was absolutely moved. And the Parks Board voted down the policy 3-1. And so that tent ban was not passed, although the overnight ban remained intact. So the feeling of joy for all of us who advocated for this was palatable. We rarely win these battles. So this was just a great moment of excitement and joy and happiness about actually winning something. And the next day, some police officers shared with us that the police would be backing off on nighttime enforcement due to the meeting the previous night. So that was even better, because and many of us were worried that they would just enforce it at night, which was just as harmful, or more harmful even. And then that very evening, after we were told that the police were going to back off, the police raided the camps, and the camp, and forced numerous people to leave at night in the winter in a pandemic. Much of their stuff abandoned and left there as they avoided police confrontation and slid into the night. Now the story goes on and on and on, and there are many details. It's been an exhausting. This just happened starting last month. This was December 8th and 9th, and there are a lot of details that have been going on related to this. But as you can imagine, many in the community responded with just outright rage to the mayor's choice to send in the police that day. And the fight that I feared manifested. And since then, my relationship with the mayor's office, the police chief, and several service providers who chose to side with the city rather than risking upsetting their relationship with them has been stunningly tense. Way worse than I expected, even worse than I thought and feared in that initial encounter. And still today, it continues. Perhaps the shining light, and I think there is a shining light in this, is that we open an emergency winter shelter in a few days with funds and support raised from the conflict. The conflict directly led to that fundraising, and in a few short days, we raised over $60,000 to fund a winter shelter. Plus, the city council is bringing forth an ordinance to make the parks accessible to people without homes when they don't have, when there alternative housing available, when the community doesn't have alternative housing available. And that fits in line with a Ninth Circuit court case that honored people's right to public space when they don't have alternative spaces to go to. So there is some shining light in there, but there's still an awful lot of conflict and tension emerging, which means hard choices, right? And when I think of hard choices, it's hard not to think of, I look to inspiration from the wisdom keepers of time. They help give me strength, and they help guide me, and encourage me. And so it's certainly hard when I think of hard choices not to think of Jesus, and particularly to think of him at the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he died, when he was trembling so fiercely that, as the Bible says, his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And there he kneeled, praying, God, take this cup from me. Jesus, at least in this story as we understand it, knowing that he was going to his death the next day, praying, take this cup from me. This is a choice. This is an agenda. This is a future I don't want. Please, please take this from me. That again, that choice, of course, is just like the choice of the 96 parliamentarians, and so many others who've been brave in time when confronted with that ultimate choice, is a choice I hope very few of us ever have to make. But perhaps those big choices in that way help us reckon with the challenge of those day-to-day choices. Perhaps they give us courage and strength as we face the more everyday acts of kindness and love. I'm generally a believer that our values don't show up in yes or no, good or bad, right or wrong, clean, clear categories. That generally there isn't a clarity of this is the perfectly right category of decision making, and this is the perfectly wrong category. But generally, our choices show up in priorities in our lives. What do we prioritize? What becomes more important than something else? What do we weigh against something else? And how do we determine what priorities come first? Every hard decision, and that's why they're hard, every hard decision has a consequence to it, a loss that comes with the choice, often a loss of something precious, really precious, something that we really cherish and we care about. It might be, the most extreme example, of course, is our lives, but the more practical choices might be our livelihood, or our respect, and how we're respected and treated by other people that we want to be in positive relationships with, or our ability to collaborate with people, or our income level, or just our sheer exhaustion. We might just be so tired that it feels hard to step forward and into a choice that we know we need to make, but we're just at our wits' end. Our integrity, however, I think is built, and I think we all I think ultimately, I think integrity is maybe the most joyous human experience there is, to live knowing that our insides match our outsides, and every step we take to that is a joyous experience. But I really believe that our integrity is built on our ability to make the choices that we know to be most loving and just. And I see life as a process of, not, again, perfection. Sometimes people are good, sometimes people are bad. But I see life as a process, in Mr. Rogers' words. I probably would phrase it a little differently, but it's Mr. Rogers. But I see life as a process of growing strength in our ability to make those hard choices, a process of deepening character, and a process of embodying courage. I see life as this process for us, that's in some way what it's teaching us to do, what it's teaching us to step into those hard decisions more and more, to live in a life and in a world and in a way that bring forth the greatest values amongst us. The greatest among us may also be the bravest. It may be that true center, that act of courage, that embodiment of courage is what gives us the strength to carry on and to make these decisions that allow us to live in the way that we believe we should. Sometimes people are good and they do just what they should. But the very same people who are good sometimes are the very same people who are bad sometimes. It's funny, but it's true. It's the same, isn't it, for me? Isn't it the same for you? Shalom, amen, and blessed be.